The land breathed like an old animal, half asleep and half waiting. Wind stirred up loose ash along the ridge, sending it spiraling in lazy columns down into the gulch below. The earth here wore the color of dried blood, rust red and raw, with only bleached yucca and twisted mesquite standing against the sun like stubborn bones. Nothing moved fast. Even the river, if it could be called that, slithered more than flowed, its banks lined with brittle reeds and caked salt. Eli McCall rode through it all like a man being swallowed in slow motion. His hat brim shaded a face that had forgotten softness. Dust had made a home in the creases of his coat, and his boots bore the scarring of years no one bothered to ask about. He didn't travel fast, and he didn't follow trails. He moved with the rhythm of someone who'd long ago stopped counting miles, not because they didn't matter, but because they couldn't be undone. By late afternoon, the wind picked up its own voice, a whispering lull that whistled between rock shelves and played the fence of a long-fallen corral. Eli dismounted near the ruins of an old Spanish mission, now just a few walls and a sunken well. A cottonwood stood nearby, its roots gripping the ground like a memory that didn't want to let go. He unsaddled the horse with the quiet of routine, lit a small fire with mesquite kindling, and boiled coffee in a blackened tin. The sound of the flame was the only movement left in the world. He sat cross-legged, staring past the fire to nothing in particular, eyes fixed on a horizon he'd never reach. The horse snorted gently nearby, chewing at dry grass. His coffee cooled untouched. Then he heard it, faint, strange, and out of place. A sound like a melody forgotten halfway through. Not birdsong, not wind, a threadbare lullaby maybe, just a few notes carried from far off. Soft as breath, softer than the fire crackling. He turned his head slightly, one hand resting near his rifle, not out of alarm, but habit. He listened, and the sound vanished into the dusk like it had never been there. The next morning the sun rose cold and white. Eli mounted again, following no path but the bend of the land itself. Down along the river's edge, where willow branches dipped into brackish water, he saw her. A figure seated low, knees drawn up, shoulders hunched, like she had folded herself into the earth. Her dress was pale, once maybe white, now streaked with dust and river silt. She sat beside a boulder, her back against it, arms cradling something wrapped in a quilt the color of smoke. She didn't look up. Eli stopped his horse 20 paces away. He dismounted slowly. No words, no gesture, just the sound of saddle leather shifting and his boots hitting dry soil. She turned her head toward him, not startled. Her face was thin, not with sickness, but with the long absence of sleep. Her eyes were sharp beneath the wear, framed by a tangle of hair unbrushed for days. The bundle in her arms shifted slightly. A baby's hand emerged, reaching blind into the morning air, then retreating back into the folds of cloth. Still, she said nothing. Eli squatted beside the river, rinsing his hands. When he looked back up, she was watching him. Not with fear, with calculation, like someone weighing the odds of a quiet mercy. He offered no introduction, just unhooked his canteen and placed it on a flat rock halfway between them. He went about gathering driftwood, rebuilding the fire from last night's embers. She did not move. Only when the coffee boiled again did she inch forward, slow, cautious. The baby made a small sound, not a cry, but a breathy whimper, like the first cloud forming before a storm. She soothed it instinctively, her hand swaying with the ghost of that same lullaby. Eli poured a tin cup and set it near her, not meeting her eyes. She picked it up with both hands. Her fingers trembled. They sat in that peculiar, drawn-out silence that belonged only to those who had run out of explanations. Later, when the fire burned low and the baby had fallen back asleep, she spoke for the first time. One word, north. Eli nodded once. They rode north. They did not speak the next day, nor the one after. The woman did not offer her name, and Eli did not ask. Her presence was not a disruption, but a quiet addition to his rhythm, as though the land had chosen to place her in his path the way it did broken fences or bleached cattle skulls. He didn't believe in fate, but he believed in signs. and her silence carried the weight of something not yet told. Each night they made camp near water, even if it was only a mud hole. She tended the baby with tired precision, her movements deliberate, habitual. Eli watched, not intrusively, more like a man studying the way birds take flight. One evening after they'd eaten and the sky had turned to copper again, he saw her trace a name into the dirt with the heel of her hand. She quickly wiped it away before the wind could read it. The baby stirred, and she cradled him tight. In the firelight, her face was softer, not from peace, but from resignation. She looked like someone who had already buried the part of herself that needed saving. Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat upright against a tree stump, rifle across his knees, the fire crackling low. Somewhere beyond the dark line of the hills, a coyote called out, not a threat, just a lonely song. Eli looked toward it, then toward the woman curled around her child, and in the hush of midnight, he realized something unspoken had passed between them, something more binding than names. Not a promise, not yet, but the start of one. The wind shifted in the days that followed, pulling cooler air down from the northern flats, and with it a scent of burnt grass and wet soil. It was a quiet season between heat and frost, a liminal space, and they moved through it without speaking much. Eli led, the woman followed. Sometimes the child cried softly, but most times he only stared with wide, unblinking eyes, as if he too was listening to the hush of the land. They passed through the bones of old settlements, half-collapsed barns, rusted fence posts, sunk in hard earth, signs with letters too faded to read. Once they found an abandoned chapel, built into the side of a red bluff, its bell tower still intact, but hollowed by lightning. She walked the inside slowly, touching the scorched altar with her fingertips. The baby slept. Eli waited by the doorway, eyes on the open plain, hat low against the light. She still had not given a name, and Eli never asked again. But late one evening, while they camped under the skeletal branches of a dead pecan grove, she told a story, not the whole of it, just a sliver. A bruise, not the wound. I gave birth beneath the preacher's roof, she said, voice hoarse from hours of silence. In the cellar. They said no one could hear. Eli said nothing. He tended the fire, turning a tin of beans slowly, the edge of flame catching his sleeve in orange flickers. He did not look at her. They made me say it was a mistake, a sin, said the boy should be taken to the sisters in Amarillo. I couldn't, she trailed off. Her hand cradled the child closer. He was quiet, mouth open in sleep, lashes fine as thread against his cheek. There was a long stretch of nothing after that. The fire snapped gently. A nightjar called out once. Then silence reclaimed everything. When Eli finally spoke, his voice came low and flat, almost like it belonged to the wind. There's a trading post near Carrizo Wash. Woman there keeps a dry ledger and a wide shotgun. She don't ask questions if your coin's clean. She gave a nod so small it might have just been the breath leaving her chest. The next morning they rode again. Each hoofall soft in the pale dirt, the child bundled and tucked into a sling across her front. She had fashioned it from the quilt, folding and knotting it with careful hands, keeping the baby near. The boy slept almost all day now, only waking to feed or to gaze wordlessly at the shape of her face. At midday they crossed paths with two men riding south, ranchers by the look of them, sunburnt, armed, quiet-eyed. They exchanged short nods with Eli, lingered longer on the woman. One muttered something, but his partner silenced him with a sharp elbow. The woman kept her eyes on the horizon, jaw tight. Eli said nothing until the riders passed out of earshot. That kind of man don't see women, just shadows of mistakes they weren't brave enough to make. She didn't reply, but the words seemed to lodge somewhere behind her eyes. The trading post came into view by dusk, a low sagging structure set against a dry ridge, its roof patched with mismatched planks and tar. A mule brayed from behind a corral. The woman Eli had spoken of emerged from the shade with a rifle slung casually over her shoulder and an iron gaze that moved over them like a scale. Eli tipped his hat. "Mira." She nodded. "You look skinnier than last time." "Different son." Mira's eyes moved to the woman beside him, then to the bundle in her arms. No question, no greeting. Just a slow step aside to let them in. Inside, the air was thick with dust and dry tobacco. Shelves leaned under the weight of canned goods and ammunition. The woman hovered near the doorway while Eli bartered for supplies. Flour, coffee, matches, clean linen, a jar of mint oil. Mira slid each item into a burlap sack with mechanical grace. "She need a name," Mira said at last, nodding toward the woman. Eli didn't answer. The woman stepped forward, voice steady. "Not yours to know." Mira smirked. "Good answer." She handed the supplies to Eli and leaned on the counter, rifle still across her back. "There's talk out east," she said slowly, "of a woman fled with a bastard boy. Town preacher claims she bewitched his congregation, fled judgment. Says she took the devil's seed into her belly." Eli's hand paused on the sack. "Preacher say a lot? Too much? But it's not just words now. He's paid a writer." The woman's face didn't change, but her shoulders stiffened. Eli finished tying the sack and slung it across his saddle. Mira nodded toward the northern trail. "You got 3 days head start, maybe 4 if he stops to sermonize." Eli glanced to the woman, then back to Mira. "Appreciate the courtesy," Mira shrugged. "Ain't for you, it's for the boy. He ain't sinned nothing yet." That night, they camped near a dry wash flanked by cotton grass. The moon rose full and hard, its light casting silver across their faces. Eli watched the edges of the dark for movement, listening for hooves that hadn't come yet. The woman sat beside the fire, unwrapping a small scrap of cloth. Inside was a crude, carved figure, a piece of driftwood shaped into something like a bird, though its wings were too wide. "I made it for him," she said, "so he remembers what flight looks like, even if he never sees it." Eli took a long moment before answering. "Sometimes memory's the only sky left." She looked at him then, really looked, as if she could almost see the shape of his past behind his eyes. But she didn't press, she didn't ask, and he offered nothing. The fire burned down to coals. She set the wooden bird beside her child and leaned back, eyes tracing the stars overhead. Somewhere far behind them, in the dark corners of a place she no longer called home, a name was still being spoken, whispered in judgment, spat in shame. But out here, in the raw openness of the land, she was no one, and that felt for the first time like freedom. The wind changed again, thinner now, touched with cold, tasting of far mountains. They moved deeper into country where maps lost their meaning, old mining roads choked with tumbleweed, fences split and bowed, and hills so wide and open they felt like the inside of a cathedral. The sun no longer scalded. It lingered low, gold and slow, casting shadows like long regrets. They traveled in rhythm. The child had begun to cough, not sharp or panicked, but a persistent rasping sound that came at night. She wrapped him tighter in the sling, stuffed dried mint into the folds, rubbed his back with fingers that never trembled. She never said the word sick, and Eli never asked. The silence between them wasn't absence. It was something more sacred, like a pact sealed with glances instead of oaths. One morning, Eli found a one-room shack off a trail half swallowed by sagebrush. The roof sagged, but the stone chimney still stood, and the door creaked on leather hinges. Inside, dust coated everything like old snow. There was a rusted stove, a cot missing half its canvas, and a cracked mirror that reflected only part of a face. They stayed. Eli spent the first afternoon fixing the chimney. She gathered dried scrub, stacking it with neat care, a practiced rhythm. The baby slept most of the time, curled into the crook of her ribs, lips parted in uneven breaths. The cough came and went, but when it came, she'd hum again, the same lullaby he had heard that first night, but quieter now, more ragged, like the memory of a song sung only to herself. They lit a fire that night with effort. The flue smoked, coughed soot, and Eli had to shove a branch up the chimney until the draft caught properly. When it finally did, the warmth filled the small room unevenly, pooling near the floor. She sat cross-legged by the hearth, rocking the child, eyes fixed on the flame like it might answer something. He cooked. Beans again, this time with a bit of dried venison Mira had packed in the sack. The scent filled the shack with something resembling memory. They didn't speak. The crackle of burning mesquite filled every hollow space. At some point she reached over and tore a strip from an old linen, dipped it in water, then pressed it against the child's chest. Eli watched. Not her face, her hands. They moved the way hands do when they've done something too many times to need thought. But beneath the certainty, he saw it, the tremor of fear not yet spoken. He stood and walked outside into the dark. The sky was ink-thick and full of silent stars. Coyotes yipped somewhere beyond the ridge. He knelt and ran his fingers through the dry dirt. Cold. Too cold for July. When he came back inside, she had curled herself around the boy on the cot, one hand still resting on his back. The firelight flickered over her cheekbones, casting her eyes in shadow. She wasn't asleep, but she didn't speak. Eli sat across from her and leaned back against the wall. One boot crossed over the other. The warmth made his shoulders ache, a reminder that comfort could still hurt if you weren't used to it. The next day they made a routine. She swept the shack with a branch broom. Eli found a spring-fed creek half a mile east and filled the canteens. He caught a rabbit using wire and patience, skinned it with quiet care, roasted it over the open fire. She boiled water, steeped leaves, spooned the liquid slowly into the baby's mouth. The child didn't cry. That was the part that unsettled Eli most. How quiet the boy was, as if the world had already taught him what not to ask for. They slept in shifts. She'd wake with the child at dusk, and Eli would rise before the first light, watching the valley from the shack's crooked doorway. They didn't speak of the preacher. They didn't ask when he might catch up. The waiting had become a part of them, not fearful, but resigned. On the fourth evening, she broke the rhythm. She sat outside the shack on a crate, the child bundled in her lap. The sky above her was smeared with lavender clouds. Eli sat sharpening his knife by lantern glow. "I was 16 when I first held a hammer," she said softly. "Built a fence with my brothers. All day under the sun. Blisters opened like new mouths, but I didn't stop." Eli didn't look up. "My mother said girls shouldn't hold tools, that hands like mine weren't meant for building." The knife hissed against the wet stone. "But I kept the hammer anyway, buried it in the barn behind the salt lick, used it when no one watched. Nails crooked, wood split sometimes, but I learned." The baby shifted, coughed. She soothed him, rocking gently. "I was building a cradle when they found out about the child." She didn't say how it happened, who the father was, if it was a choice or a cruelty. The West never gave full answers, only echoes. Eli finally spoke. "Cradle still standing?" She looked at him. "No, they burned it." The fire between them popped. A coal jumped and rolled close to his boot. He let it sit. They said no child born of sin should be rocked in something shaped by its mother's hands. Eli's face didn't change, but he reached down and nudged the coal back toward the flame with a flat stick. "I built better since," she said, her voice turning inward again. "I build quiet things now that don't need wood or nails." Eli looked at the child, sleeping as if he understood something his body hadn't caught up to. "He's stronger than he seems," he said. She nodded. "I'll make sure of it." Later that night, she found Eli outside, seated on a log, sharpening a second stick into a point. "For what?" she asked. "Coyotes," he said. She sat beside him, child still pressed to her chest. The silence stretched again, not cold this time, just wide. "What was her name?" she asked. Eli didn't move. His hands worked the knife, slow, deliberate. "Yours," she said, "the woman you don't speak of." He paused. The stick stopped spinning. "She liked fires," he said finally. Could sit by one for hours. Didn't matter if it burned bright or just smoldered. The woman didn't press. She died in winter, he added. No more. They sat with that for a while. The child breathed soft even. A wind passed low through the dry grass. Somewhere, a barn owl called, brief and haunting. She leaned a little closer to the fire, watching the embers crackle. You build good fires, he gave a faint nod. Only thing I'm sure of. They left the shack on the 5th morning. No reason spoken. Just a mutual sense, the kind that lives under the skin, that it was time to move again. The child's cough had eased, but not vanished, and the nights were colder. Eli packed the mule slowly, his movements smooth, like he'd done it in dreams 1,000 times. She tightened the sling across her chest, adjusting the bundle so the baby's face caught the pale warmth of morning light. They didn't speak as they rode. The trail northward curved through high grass and small bones, rabbit, prairie dog, something else once hunted. The world around them had thinned, both in color and in noise. Days stretched like canvas, wind-brushed, dry, sun-stung. Even the birds were quiet here. And then, late in the afternoon, just as the light turned syrup thick, they heard hooves, distant, steady. They didn't stop riding, just shifted slightly, as if their bodies instinctively knew which way the trouble would come from. By dusk, the sound had grown clearer. Just one horse, no posse, just a single rider keeping slow pace, like a shadow refusing to be outrun. That night they made camp in the hollow of a dried creek bed. A few cottonwoods leaned against the stars, brittle and birdless. Eli didn't light a fire. Instead they sat close together, backs to the rock wall, listening to the hush of wind through dead reeds. The baby stirred once, then quieted. She held him tighter. "He's not here to talk," she said. Eli nodded, barely perceptible. "Preachers never are." She stared into the dark as if it might answer her. "I thought if I left quiet enough they'd forget me, or remember me in the wrong shape, a ghost, a warning." Eli's voice came low even. "You don't control the stories they tell, just the ones you live." He came at dawn, rode slow into the dry wash like he'd been part of the land all along. A tall man in a black duster, dust coating his boots, hat pulled low. He looked like a ruin that still stood because nothing else dared claim the space. The preacher. His horse was lean and pale-eyed, tethered to nothing. He rode to the edge of the camp and stopped, eyes moving between them, Eli still as stone, the woman seated beside the child, unmoving. "Your name is Abigail," the preacher said. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Daughter of Maybelle and Jonas Rigg. You were baptized in the river north of St. Elmo when you were 8 years old." She didn't move, didn't blink. "You've strayed far." Still, silence. The preacher's horse shifted its weight. A breeze lifted a piece of cloth from the woman's pack and dropped it again. Eli stood. "You can turn back now," he said. The preacher looked at him, smiled, or something like it. "Forgive me, son. This is a matter of salvation." "She didn't ask for yours." The preacher dismounted, slow and deliberate, no weapon drawn. His hands moved like sermon pages, open, performative. "Every lamb strays, but the shepherd must retrieve. Her boy is illegitimate, unclaimed. The church offers mercy, protection, redemption." "No," she said, just the one word. It hit like stone on glass. "You left me in that cellar," she continued, "while you preached above me." The preacher's smile stiffened. "We offered shelter. You offered silence." Eli stepped forward, one hand resting lightly on the knife at his belt, not in threat, but in readiness. The preacher watched him. "You think you're protecting her," he said. "You're just helping her vanish. But sin follows." Eli didn't flinch. "So does fire." A pause hung between them, a stillness so complete that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the preacher turned, mounted, reins slack in his hands. "You can run, you can hide, but there are records, names, births. A child belongs to something." She stood now too, the baby in her arms, quiet as dusk. "He belongs to me," she said. The preacher looked at her one last time, but not like a man seeing a person, more like someone turning from a painting they didn't understand. He rode out the same way he came, slowly, dust rising behind him in a tired ribbon. They stayed another night just to be sure. The fire was small, just enough to keep the cold off the baby's breath. Eli sat with his back against a stone, watching stars blink out one by one. She sat on the other side of the flame, running her fingers through the baby's fine hair. "I don't want him to grow up erasing himself," she said. Eli nodded. "I want him to know the sound of his own name, the shape of his own hands." Eli looked at the fire. "You'll teach him," she exhaled slow. "You think people can really become something else?" she asked. "No." He turned to her. "But they can become more of what they already are." She looked down at the child. "Then I want him to be a storm." The days that followed felt lighter. They came to a place where the land opened wide again, a stretch of high plain, dotted with yellow flowers that had no name. She dismounted and walked through them barefoot, the child against her chest, laughing for the first time in days. The sound startled even her. She laughed again, not loud, not careless, but free. That evening, as Eli tied the mule to a cedar post and unpacked supplies, she did something new. She took charcoal from the edge of the fire and wrote her name on the side of a flat boulder, not for anyone to find, not for history, just for herself. Abigail. And beneath it, in smaller letters, another name. Not hers, not Eli's, just the child's. A name no preacher had spoken, no record had filed, no town had burned. A name born in exile, drawn in ash, and written into the land. The valley found them without warning. A fold in the land, hidden between two ridgelines where the grass turned thick and green, fed by a stream that spoke in murmurs. Cottonwoods lined the banks like guardians, and wild lupin bloomed in soft blue drifts along the hills. It was the kind of place that didn't need fences, not because it was unclaimed, but because it was forgotten. The West had passed it by, too quiet for conquest, too humble for maps. Eli paused at the ridge, the mule behind him, the woman and child riding just ahead. He looked down at the basin below, where the stream twisted like a silver ribbon. A small rise to the north held a clutch of flat stones, as if nature had once planned a house and then changed its mind. They dismounted together, no words. She stepped into the grass, boots brushing past seed heads heavy with morning dew. The child stirred, let out a soft hum, not quite laughter, but brighter than anything Eli had heard from him before. "This is it," she said, though she wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. She knelt by the stream and cupped water in her hand, touching it gently to the boy's forehead. He blinked, then smiled, a slow, crooked thing, and for the first time, the world felt like it was leaning in instead of turning away. They built the shelter piece by piece. Eli found stone among the rise and set the foundation in a half-circle facing east. Abigail gathered fallen branches and dry grass for bedding. The mule was let loose to graze in the far field, never straying too far, as if it too sensed a kind of end. At night the fire was lit with a gentler hand. No longer a signal, no longer a ward against threat, just warmth, something earned, something deserved. Abigail began to sing again, but differently now, not just to the child, but to the land itself. She hummed as she stirred flour and creek water into flat cakes. She sang wordless notes as she laid stones in a row, marking where her small garden would grow. She moved with a quiet certainty, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hair tied back with the length of the same quilt that once cradled her son. The child, named now Fully, had begun to walk in short, drunken steps, arms out, eyes wide with discovery. He toddled from tree to tree, from Eli's boot to Abigail's skirt hem, laughing like he had no memory of silence. Eli watched from the porch of the half-built shelter, knife in one hand, whittling a stick into something smooth. He never asked for the child's name, but she had carved it once, softly, into the wood beam above the door. Rowan, no surname, no burden, just Rowan. Summer bled into early autumn. The cottonwoods yellowed. The air thinned. Abigail began to mark stones. Not gravestones, not memories of death, but something else. She scratched symbols into them, a feather, a river curl, the outline of a sleeping child. She placed them near the stream, at the edge of the garden, beneath the biggest cottonwood. Eli never asked what they meant. He only helped carry them, one by one, placing them where she pointed. One night she stood beside the fire, her face lit in flickers. She held one last stone in her hand, the smoothest of them all, and turned to Eli. "This one's mine." He gave her a look, waiting. She scratched a mark into it, just a single curved line, a flame perhaps, or a bird mid-flight. "I want him to remember I was here, that I wasn't just something that ran." Eli stirred the fire, the embers glowing deeper. "You didn't run," he said. She looked at him, really looked. The lines in his face, the way his eyes never quite settled. A man built for silence, but who chose to stay. "No," she said quietly, "I didn't." Or they never spoke of the preacher again, whether he'd turned back, disappeared into dust, or still rode the horizon. It didn't matter. The valley held them now. The world outside could say what it wanted. In this place, no name was a sentence, only an offering. One morning, Abigail rose early. The sun was still low, the valley held in mist. Rowan slept beside her on the cot, a hand curled under his cheek. She stepped outside and found Eli already awake, seated near the fire pit, a blackened coffee tin beside him. She sat beside him without a word. After a time, she spoke. "I don't want him to remember me as someone who was erased." Eli didn't answer at first. He stared out at the stream, listening to its soft music. "He won't," he said. "Not if he grows up seeing you leave your mark." She nodded, staring into the distance. Then, with her finger, she began to trace letters in the dirt beside the fire. Her name, his name, Rowan's, each one connected like a string of breath. When she finished, she looked up. "I want him to be proud of the woman they cast out. I want them to tell stories about her, not because she broke rules, but because she raised something no one could destroy." Eli reached down, smoothed the dirt where the names were written, not to erase them, but to press them in. "You will be," he said. "A legend in the way that matters." Seasons turned. Snow touched the higher ridges. Birds moved south. Traders passed sometimes, far in the distance, but never close. The valley stayed hidden, protected by its silence. Abigail taught Rowan to walk through water, to listen to wind, to hold his breath and close his eyes when the leaves fell, to feel the change, not just see it. And Eli built with her. A second shelter, a pen for goats they didn't yet have, a small wooden bench beneath the cottonwood. They didn't speak of the future, they lived it. One evening, after Rowan had fallen asleep and the sun was sinking in gold behind the hills, Abigail sat alone by the stream. Eli approached quietly, boots brushing the grass. She didn't turn. "Do you think they'll ever say my name without shame?" she asked. Eli didn't answer. Instead, he took a piece of charcoal from his coat, the same kind she used on the stones, and handed it to her. She stared at it, then looked at the large stone beside her, smooth and pale and waiting. With a steady hand, she wrote her name again, Abigail Rigg. Then underneath it, just one word more, "Mother." Eli stepped back, tipping his hat low. A coyote howled from the far ridge, soft and distant. Rowan stirred in his sleep, then settled again. The fire crackled behind them. The stars emerged above the valley, quiet and silver. And in that silence, her name echoed, not spoken, not shouted, but carried in wind and water, in soot and stone, in a child's breathing and a man's steady presence. A legend not born of fire, but of survival, of choosing to remain.